Generally, more or less the quarter was in line. I think there was differences amongst the operators. Obviously, operators like Sands and Galaxy underdelivered, which was partly unexpected. I think the second quarter should have a little bit more clarity to it. I think both Galaxy and I think Sands in particular will still be at a lower level of market share than theoretically they should be, and that's largely because of the discrepancy between premium mass recovery and base mass recovery. And those large-scale operators really need a better recovery in the base mass, which will happen. It's just going to take a little bit longer. So, I think both April and May shook out pretty well, probably better than people were initially expecting. Obviously, with all the data that's available for Macau, we're constantly getting weekly data and channel checks, and everybody's expectations increase. And by the time we get to the end of the month, it's usually in line or disappointing. But if you kind of look back where people were thinking a month or two prior, the numbers are actually shaking out to be a little bit better. So June's always a wild card, right? Weather in June is one of the biggest wild cards. The calendar works really well in June. So I think the second quarter will be more or less in line with expectations. But it's going to be interesting to see how the market share kind of shakes out. Yeah, well, May's going to be high because you had Golden Week, right? June doesn't really have a Golden Week period. So, but if you look at kind of the last 2 weeks of May versus kind of where June's going to be, that might give you a better indication. But generally, June is the weakest month of the year. So the fact that it'll be down 7 or 8% from May or 9%, that shouldn't be a big surprise. The real question, I think, is going to be what happens in July and August. Because historically, August, July, you start getting a lot more of that base mass coming in. And it's going to be interesting to see whether we see that. And unfortunately with Macau, there's very little foresight in terms of understanding how that market shakes out until they actually get there. I don't think so. First of all, I think the Philippines is going to be harder to go to the Philippines. Just internally, Philippines has made visa issuances for Chinese harder. So I think the market here will stay stable. I think it'll continue to grow. I think the wild card is just the base mass again. So while there will be a little bit more international travel, I think the reality is it's kind of a double-edged sword here, because if the economy improves, people are going to be more comfortable going away for longer. What's benefited Macau partially is people are willing to do trips, but shorter trips. So the wealthier, the premium customers can come to Macau for 3 days. They bring their family now. They'll do that once every couple months because they don't want to go to Europe for 3 weeks, right? They don't want to go to Australia for 2 weeks. If suddenly they feel more comfortable with their business, with the economic environment, that they're willing to take those 2 to 3 week trips, that's fine. They might not come. But then that rising economy and confidence levels should drive even more visitation into Macau. So some of those people may wind up leaving, coming less frequently, but I think the offset is that you'll get a lot better visitation kind of going forward. So I think the continuation of airlift into the greater Macau area, Hong Kong, Zhuhai, I think that all bodes well, right? I think the IVS visa expansions and other visa changes, I think are all very positive, and I think they're being underestimated by investors, not in terms of what they could do, because I think it takes time for all of that to work through, but in terms of what China's policy stance towards Macau is. Yeah. I think we're in the best political environment with respect to how China looks at Macau than we've been in since Edmund Ho was chief executive. They might. Look, I think they already added a significant number of cities, and even now those cities don't have good connectivity into Macau, so that's going to take a little bit of time. And once we're through the 50 or the 60 cities, we're then talking about a lower economic kind of environment and what kind of customers you're going to draw from those. It becomes less and less important. So the marginal return on new cities is theoretically lower, right? But as we know, the penetration of China overall, not for the entire country because it's irrelevant, but for people that can actually afford to come to Macau, is still dramatically lower than it is in other jurisdictions. Like in the US, 1 in 4 adults goes to a casino at least once a year, right? Like the Chinese penetration of the addressable client, right? Not the 1.4 billion, but the 200 million people is still well below that. So the question is, how do we get there? I think still for the long term in Macau, the biggest problem we're going to have in Macau is hotel room availability. Right now, it's not an issue. We've had a significant expansion number of hotel rooms from 2019, but I think eventually we're going to get into this point where people want to come, but they just can't because there's nowhere to stay, especially on a weekend and a holiday. It's only feasible if you open the border completely, so allow people to stay directly in Henshin, easily come over, which means you can't be waiting at the border for a half hour. You can't be going into the group. Like, you have to be able to just get up, get in a car, come over, make that much more accessible. Then it works. Are we going to get that next month? No. Will we get it in 2 years? Possibly. I think this group visa, Henshin Macau group visa, is kind of a test case. But then you also have to, there's hotel rooms in Henshin, but you're going to have to build a lot more, right? So I think it'll all work down the road, but these things take a long time. Yeah, I just think the political situation in Thailand makes it not really feasible for foreign investment of scale to come in, because you need political stability and assurance of what this market looks like before you invest those dollars. Singapore was a unique example because you had that. So the operators had confidence that, hey, we could build a $5 billion property in Singapore. In Macau, don't forget, that didn't happen out of the box. Like, out of the box, they built, Star World. They built Sands Macau. They didn't build a Londoner, right, or Galaxy Macau. That took a long time. So to kind of force investors, developers to come in and say, well, you have to do a $3 billion property, and by the way, we want 8 of them, that's completely unrealistic ask. Vietnam tried to do this for a long time, failed. Some people were crazy enough to gather resources and build something, but it just doesn't work, right? So I think it's difficult. I think it's very, very difficult because of that political construct. I think I think everybody's interested, right? So everyone is there. I think all the operators have been to Thailand. I think they've met with all the potential partners. They've met with the government. There's a difference between going to these things and meeting with them and then actually pulling the trigger and investing dollars. It's a big, big difference. As a large global developer, you have to be in markets that are opening up that make sense. Like, you have to be there to see that and make sure you don't miss the opportunity. But I think when push comes to shove and when you have to actually make the investment decision, I think under the current construct of what Thailand is, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to do. I think it would be Abu Dhabi rather than Dubai. I don't think any of the other Emirates would do anything. So if it's Abu Dhabi, the impact on RAK should be much more limited. If it's Dubai, it'll be fairly negative. The concept for Dubai was like, we could easily open up a casino because there's kind of the building is there, right? I'm not sure that means a whole lot. I just don't think Dubai needs to do anything, really. And I think this is all me hypothesizing, right? I think RAK is trying to build a destination leisure kind of oriented economy. That's their only advantage. They have really not much more. Dubai is booming. It doesn't need to add a casino. Like, it doesn't add anything to its economy. So politically, the Emirates, you need to have consensus around certain things. And so I think as a result of that, I think Dubai just becomes less likely, right? Like, they'd leave it for RAK to do. Abu Dhabi's far enough away. They have their own airport. Like, it's a little bit different. So they may decide to do it. But again, I don't even think they need it, right? The question is, like, why do you want to have gaming, right? RAK kind of needs it because they think it's a draw for their leisure environment. But Abu Dhabi and Dubai, do they need it? Not really.